Podcast 85, The First Task. Podcast 85, The First Task, relates unexpected difficulties I had to face with the Educational Cooperative in my new role as its Director of Psychological and Special Education Services during the beginning days of July 1973. The first task. Events don't always unfold as we had envisioned that they would. Such was the case with my dissertation and the cooperative. As a result of a misunderstanding, my doctoral committee missed the deadline for submitting documentation that I had completed the doctoral program requirements. I was not able to receive my degree in August 1973. I would have to wait until December. Dr. Oakes, Bill, was not concerned about the delay. I met the qualifications for being certified as a school psychologist by the Tennessee Department of Education without it. The university's psychology department indicated that I was qualified to supervise doctoral-level school psychology graduate assistants. I could not become a licensed psychologist by the Tennessee Board of Healing Arts until I had received the doctorate. Assuming I passed all of their other requirements to become licensed, that would not happen until January 1974. When that time arrived, I would become a licensed psychologist with a specialty in school psychology. Thanks to Bill's understanding of the situation, I had a degree of flexibility in my July work schedule. This allowed me to effectively conclude my last-minute doctoral duties with the university. Until the end of December, I would still have to be a registered student in the doctoral program. I was required to pay the university for carrying additional dissertation hours. Fortunately, my GI educational support continued as a result of that enrollment, for those payments helped ease the financial burden of paying the university fees. Early in July, Bill called me into his office to say, "Jerry, we have a problem. Our 7 school systems have yet to finalize their contracts with the cooperative for the school psychological services we plan to provide. We will be meeting with all the 7 superintendents a week from today to get their firm commitment to provide us with the promised funds. It would help if you met with every superintendent before that meeting to re-explain how we are going to use each system's funds to create and manage the delivery of psychological services to its system as well as to the other member systems. The superintendents are afraid that some of their money will be used to provide services to one of the other systems. You will be able to reassure them that this is not the case." Since Bill and I had already devised a strategy to ensure that one school system's funding would not be used to pay for services another system received, I did not perceive a problem in meeting this request. My problem was that I did not know who the 7 superintendents were or where their offices were located. Another problem that was hard for me to face was dis-ease about interacting with school superintendents. They were the key authority figures. Remembering being in elementary school, high school, college, and graduate school, knowing that I was just a lowly student and they were the biggest of the big, placed a heavy weight upon me emotionally. Up to this time, to me they had represented punishment if you crossed the system. At that time, I realized that I had successfully interacted with lots of senior authority figures in the past. Twice I had to appear before the commanding general of the Special Warfare Center to face a complaint filed against me. In one case, the senior officer, a colonel, of a class I was instructing, objected to a point I was making. Once the general understood what I had said or done, he supported my position. There were other similar situations in other organizations where I was supported by the chief authority figure. Logically, my feelings of intimidation from education authority figures were not warranted. However, they were real feelings. I had to shake off the cultural weight of the educational authoritarian role model if I was to accomplish the goals of the cooperative. The 3 member counties of the cooperative covered a large geographical area. I doubted that it was possible to drive from one edge of the landmass to the other in a workday while making all the visits necessary. Further complicating travel from one superintendent's office to another was the lack of roadsides. There was a deficit of signs that told you what rural road you were currently driving on, although there were plenty of signs telling you what road you could make a right or left turn onto. I got lost a lot trying to drive from one school system central office to another. This was frustrating because I had set appointment times to meet with each superintendent. In my first meeting with the superintendent, it became apparent that he did not understand the immediate requirements of the law to evaluate children for the purpose of determining if they qualified for special education services. I learned that up to this point, when all but the major city school systems wanted a child to be evaluated by a psychologist about a school-related issue, the system contacted someone in the state capital, Nashville. The State Department of Education would send a licensed psychologist to the system to conduct the evaluation. The Department of Education made a direct payment to the psychologist for the evaluation. Sometimes the selected psychologist was located more than 100 miles from the school building in which the evaluation was conducted. Once the report from the psychologist was sent to the school system decided if it would provide the child with special services. That special service focused on placing the child in a program or class that had been created years before and currently had an opening. More often than not, the system decided that it could not serve the child. Therefore, the child could not attend school. To their credit, some of the rural school systems provided a few special education services. For example, a system might have 3 or 4 classrooms, designed for moderately retarded children. Retarded was a socially accepted term in 1973. If a child was more retarded than the system felt it could serve, the system simply told the parents the child could not attend school. This model of psychological services dominated the thinking of the educators in the cooperative's region, including the superintendents. They did not understand the depth of services a comprehensive delivery model of school psychology could provide, nor the demands of special services they were required to provide. A relatively small number of Tennessee school systems had special education centers serving severely disabled children. Typically, children with severe physical disabilities would be attending these centers. Those children who had to be in wheelchairs or suffered from severe brain damage or acute autistic symptoms were the ones usually attending such centers. A key misunderstanding held by the superintendents and their subordinates concerned the concept of special education services. To them, special education services meant having specialized programs ready to serve children who fit the requirements of those programs. This conceptualization conflicted with the intent of the new Tennessee special education law. The law focused on building individualized special education services around the needs of each identified child. It was clear in my first interview with a superintendent that I needed to explain the nature of comprehensive school psychological services, the intent of the special education law in identifying a qualified disability, and the necessity to determine to what extent a child's regular education would have to be adjusted in order for the child to receive an appropriate education. The most pressing concern articulated by the majority of superintendents was that at least some of the money provided to the cooperative would be used to provide services to children in other school systems. They feared that other school systems would try to influence the cooperative's administration to the detriment of their children. In short, the member school systems did not trust each other. Many of the school systems were in competition with the neighboring systems to prove to their voters that their leadership, their school system, was better than the surrounding ones. I quickly realized that my task in meeting with each of the superintendents was far more complicated than simply convincing them to use their special education evaluation allotments to fund school psychological services through LTVC. I had to assist them in understanding what the new model for serving all children with disabilities was, how the cooperative would ensure their funding would only be used for their children, and how the psychological services model was critical to their meeting the new requirements. Superintendents are busy professionals. Spending a half hour in a one-on-one meeting constitutes a long meeting for the majority of them. My meeting with them was going to be a lengthy affair if I was to cover all the information they needed to know. At the end of each meeting during that week, I felt that the superintendents understood our plan to ensure that their money would only be used for their children. I also felt I had assured them that Bill Oakes and I would be able to resist pressure from other member systems to deviate from this plan. In each meeting, the time pressures on the superintendent was such that I was never confident that they understood the difference between a child with an identified disability who did not need special education services, a child who needed simple classroom adjustments in order for their educational needs to be met, a child who needed to receive some specialized services outside the classroom part of a day, and the child who needed the services all day, every day. Understanding the difference between developing and delivering an individualized program for a child as contrasted to simply placing the child in a generic special education program, was another difficult concept to communicate in the time frame allotted me with each superintendent. By the meeting time scheduled for the cooperative's superintendents to announce their decision concerning their contracts with LTVC, I felt fairly confident that they understood the cooperative's plan for the delivery of school psychological services. However, I did not know if all, some, or none of them intended to participate in the program. The details of the program were interwoven with the requirements of the new special education law. For those encountering the requirements for the first time, the actions that needed to take place were complex. An explanation of some of the new requirements will reveal the level of complexity encountered by those who believe that special education's role had always been simply to take disadvantaged children out of the regular classroom and place them in some kind of a program. In turn, the plan for ensuring school systems that they would receive their fair share of psychological services through the cooperative needs to be thoroughly explained. We all understood the State Department of Education's plan for funding this first year of implementing the law. The state was providing $1 per child enrolled in a school system for the purpose of identifying all children with qualifying disabilities, and then to develop plans for meeting the educational needs of those children. The state did not plan to actually provide additional funding for delivering new special education services to the systems until the following year. To a school system of 50,000 students, $1 a child was a lot of money in 1973. However, $1 per child for a system of 1,200 students couldn't do much in establishing comprehensive testing services. Pooling resources through the educational cooperative model was an excellent solution for its member school systems. In this way, they could all provide the necessary psychological evaluations with the funding provided them. In order for a child to receive special education services funded by the state, the child had to have one of the state's qualifying disabilities, and that qualifying disability had to be negatively interfering with the effectiveness of the child's regular education program. To most educators, this meant that if the regular classroom instruction didn't produce normal progress in a child with a disability, then some educational changes needed to be made. Those educational adjustments needed to take place in as normal a classroom environment as possible. I thought all of the superintendents understood the cooperative's school psychology delivery model. The plan included employing me as the supervising school psychologist. In turn, I would employ senior graduate students as graduate assistants from the University of Tennessee's doctoral school psychology program. They were to work in the participating school systems. Each school system would receive the same percentage of school psychological services hours as they paid into the cooperative for these services when compared to the total amount of money provided to the cooperative by the member systems. For example, If a school system paid $20,000 of the $100,000 paid to LTVEC for school psychological services, that school system would receive 20% of all the school psychology services provided. That would mean 20% of all psychoeducational tests conducted would be for that system, as well as 20% of all teacher-parent conferences, all educational planning meetings attended, all direct interventions provided by a service provider, etc. Each school system would receive regular reports of the various school psychological services provided to its system, as well as records of the services provided to the other systems. The percentages of the services provided to each school system when compared to the total amount of services provided would be compiled on a monthly basis and presented to the LTVEC Board of Directors at the monthly Board of Directors meetings. Any monthly discrepancies between actual percentages of services provided a school system above or below the contracted percentage of services would be explained with the anticipation that there would be appropriate corrections in the coming months. It had been established earlier that there would have to be in-service training for teachers and staff about the special education law. The law would require new educational strategies on the part of many teachers. Those in services were included in the definition of school psychological services. Depending on the funds made available to the cooperative, an educational specialist would be employed to assist in this task. The week before the cooperative's decisive decision meeting with the 7 school systems went fast for me, constantly getting lost on the back roads of our rural counties caused me to arrive late to some meetings. At that time, the interstate highway connecting Knoxville and Chattanooga was not complete. The fastest route for me to travel from Alcoa to Sweetwater included driving several miles on a one-lane dirt and gravel road. I learned about that shortcut from verbal instructions that I did not fully understand. I got to see a lot of beautiful countryside finding that gravel road. The standing jokes about how instructions for getting from one place to another were given included, "You're not from around here, are you?" And You go down here a ways and then turn left by that red barn that burned down a while back." A few of the superintendents became impatient with the time it was taking to cover all of the information I felt they needed to know. I pressed the issue. The information was necessary if they were to make an informed decision about funding the cooperative's proposal. The day before the big meeting, I had my last superintendent conference. It was with the superintendent of the largest system in the cooperative. He had missed the last cooperative's board of directors meeting, the meeting of my interview. Without this system's participation, I was not sure we could develop the comprehensive program I envisioned. At last, the final day had arrived. A large former classroom of the old Alcoa High School served as the cooperative's conference room. It appeared that all of the superintendents were present. Several superintendents had brought key staff members with them. People were standing throughout the room in clumps talking to each other, waiting for Bill to call the meeting to order. I seemed to be the only one all by himself. There was no one there that I really knew outside of Bill. He was deeply engaged with a couple of administrators. I didn't want to just barge in and disrupt their flow of conversation. Then I noticed a new arrival. He stood by the entrance to the room, looking around. Walking up to him, I held out my hand as I displayed a big smile, saying, "Hi, I'm Jerry Morton with LTVEC. I don't believe I've had the chance to meet you." "Why, yes, you have," he said with a nodding smile. "I'm sorry, sir, but I don't think we have." "Come on," he exclaimed with a puzzled look. "We met in my office yesterday. I'm Leroy Gooden, superintendent of the county schools." What a fool I must appear to be flashed across my mind as I replied, "Oh, yes, I'm so sorry. It's just that I have been meeting so many new people in such a short time." I stammered out as I thought, I have just blown away the biggest school system in the cooperative. Laughing, with his eyes twinkling, he replied, "I'm glad to see it happens to other people too. This constantly greeting new people kind of gets to you, doesn't it?" I nodded vigorously as we both chuckled. The announcement was made. The meeting started. Under the conditions described, all 7 school systems decided to provide funding to LTVEC for school psychological services. Some of the school systems designated all of the funds the state provided for LTVC's school psychological services, while others used some of the money for other purposes. In total, LTVC had about $100,000 for the services, with the largest school system providing about $40,000 and the smallest system putting in around $5,000.